What's up, Charles?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Oh, it's good to have you back, bro. Good to have you back, my man.
Same here, brother. Same here.
How's your we've been reading a lot about some incidences at the airports, man. Just I mean,
Well, in fairness to everyone, the good thing about it is the quick response by the officers involved um, is the key that made the difference. They did what they were supposed to do, what they're trained to do, especially when within the federal guidelines of what they need to do. People think, they use the word security, but they're actually both security and airport police. Um, all Everyone at the airport, they're commissioned with powers. That's why they can cite, they can arrest. So it's not like it's not like your basic security. But of course, they got to go through numerous hours of training, and as you can imagine, I
yeah,
think when they first started in June, the training was almost like 14 hours a day, and they had
wow,
to pass all these requirements that was set forth by the state. If the company that took over the contract wants to participate in providing, as a contractor, you have to do that. So it's pretty mind-boggling, but at the same token, it's exciting. I like to say aloha to everyone. I'm glad to be back. I apologize. It's just the hours have been getting longer and longer. And it's just because a lot of things are changing, the dynamics of how people come in from abroad, especially if they don't have proper testing. We have to just keep a keen eye on that. We work in conjunction with Roberts Hawaii. They've got the contract. And, it's tough. They have a tough job because why? They're constantly in front of people. So when you have someone that's already coming down the chute, and for those of you that know the Lihue Airport, they have these chutes, and they built this screening room at the very end. When travelers from domestic arrivals come from out of state, that's when it gets a little hairy because hopefully they present their names and they have their the safe travels, right? The app, it's downloaded. Sometimes people come over, they put the information in, but they didn't get their test results. And as they're coming over the Pacific, the results come in, and sometimes the results come in that they're positive. So that puts everybody on high alert, especially when you have to deal with them. And of course, um, the traveler, they spend a lot of money to come to Hawaii, only to be told that they got to quarantine. And, we don't make the rules. We just try to prevent any kind of spread, whether you have symptoms or not, because there are some people who are very vulnerable. And as you know, Mel, the numbers have been telling, right? Those, especially those who die from this virus.
hmm
Yeah. So,
five deaths this week so far on Kauai. Five. So
wow.
yeah, we'll talk about that tonight. I just wanted to say a real special shout out from Dwayne from Howell, Michigan, with Mom Anita, 76-year old. Welcome to the show, Mom Anita, and thank you
Good
for
evening.
joining us.
Yeah.
Also wanted to, I saw Melissa Bolton get on, and I just wanted to again ask. You saw my post the other day for prayers for her cousin's wife, Trina, who is suffering, fighting for her life with cancer, stage four. Basically, you know, on her last days, and still cannot get a bed at the hospital because of COVID. She doesn't have COVID, but because of the COVID, because of the hospitals are ripping apart at the seams. They just don't have enough capacity. And
Mm.
one of the
Sorry to hear
discussions we'll
that.
have tonight. Yeah. So please, guys, village, get out and send a real quick prayer for Trina and for Melissa and entire family. Um, we know prayer works, and man, at this point, we just want to pray for her to get a room. so her family can go and see her for the last time. So and that's why I get so and again it's irritating, it's frustrating, and it's a little Friday. I want to keep the show positive, but I get really frustrated. I was just watching the news tonight, and they're so excited about safe travels. They're so excited that the governor didn't add the booster requirement. They're looking forward to one day ending safe travels, and they're talking about how our number we're in a good place, and we're not in a good place. Our hospitals are not in a good place, and that's where we all got to go if we get sick or hurt. So, and I think that's the frustration I have, and it's no secret. So tonight we have Dr. Tim Brown. You guys all know Dr. Tim Brown. He's one of Hawaii's top experts from COVID, and you know, I hope our villagers can appreciate Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown. He has studied this thing from day one. He has put out calculations and projections that have been straight to the point and so accurate. We've seen him on the news. We've seen him on the Star Advertiser Spotlight. We've seen him on our show. This guy knows his stuff, and we're so blessed to have him on tonight. And I just hope we all can appreciate. Oh, the Clubhouse crew is in the house, so we're getting streamed on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse. So uh, it's important we get this information out. And Dr. Brown is in here. He's camera shy. No, he's not. This guy, I can listen to this guy all day long. I can listen to this guy all day long. Charlie, it's like the old time bookies. You remember the old time when you would go ask that one person who was going to win the game on Sunday, and the guy was always correct. That's kind of how I feel about Dr. Tim Brown, but of something much more serious than a football game, COVID. So welcome to the show, Doc, and appreciate you making the time.
Afraid I can't give you guys any idea who's going to win the game on Sunday.
We know it'll be the Rams. It'll be the Rams. But anyway, Doc, lots been going on. I did see your spotlight on the Star Advertiser Spotlight last week. It was a great interview, and I kind of wanted to touch on that and kind of have you give us an overview of what's been going on. We're seeing now across the country a lot of governors are lifting mask mandates, and everybody's starting to feel like we're getting through the tunnel. I think, in fact, our lieutenant governor said, we're at the end of the tunnel, we're heading out. And yet, some of our healthcare workers are telling me that the hospitals are at capacity. We have people in hallways, we have people in ERs cannot find rooms. Kauai had 5 deaths so far this week. I hope there's no more. So I'm not so sure if we're at the end of the tunnel, but that's why we asked you to come on tonight to give us a kind of overview of what the heck's going on.
Well, I think, my take at this point is, yes, we seem to be at the end of we're not at the end, but we're coming down the slope on the Omicron surge. We're coming down a little slower than we went up if you look at the actual positivity rates rather than looking at the caseloads. Caseloads probably came down faster for a number of factors. Number one, I think there was a lot more testing before Christmas and New Year's, with people testing before going to parties or visiting relatives and so on. So that probably elevated the numbers in that time frame. But then after New Year's, that probably dropped off a bit. The lines were kind of long, so a lot of people probably didn't go for testing. Home tests were becoming much more readily available. So I think a lot of people probably just chose to take a home test instead of to go and get one of these, tests that in some cases was taking days to come back. I mean, we've continued to have problems, I know, especially on the Big Island, with very slow return of results from some of these mainland companies who frankly shouldn't be doing business here as far as I'm concerned. If you can't turn results around in 24 hours, you basically shouldn't be doing COVID testing in the state, because it doesn't make sense, since we know that rapid, if you go in and get on treatment, you need to get on treatment as soon as you test positive. And if you delay a few days, then the effectiveness of the treatments will drop. So, I think a lot of those different factors have contributed to the seemingly very rapid decline in cases. But if you actually look at the positivity rates that they have started reporting now, we are coming down a little more slowly than we went up, which is not surprising. That was the same thing we saw in South Africa. I think it's what places, if you look at the positivity rate, tend to do. The case rates are complicated because of limitations of testing and shifts to rapid testing and home testing that I think are making it a real problem for the case reporting systems to give you an actual trend. They tend to vary over time based on who's getting tested. With that said, I mean, it's important to remember we're still at over 700 cases today. The positivity rate is still, I think, about 8% on a statewide basis. That means we are far from out of this. And I do worry, actually, with the Super Bowl coming up this weekend and a lot of people getting together for Super Bowl parties, that we could see a lot of COVID transmission going on if people aren't careful. So if you are going to Super Bowl party this weekend, open the windows, open the doors, hold the party as much outdoors as you possibly can. If you have substantial risk, then wear a mask. You know, even if other people at the party aren't wearing masks, if you wear a mask, it will help to protect you, especially if it's a higher quality mask. And just be careful. I mean, use your home test kits if you've gotten them. I know I'm one of those. I applied on the first day for the federal home test kits, and I still haven't seen them. So, but I'm getting reports from different people that they are slowly starting to come in. So no, we're not out of the woods yet, and I think people still have to be very, very cautious. And what concerns me going forward is that people are going to think that this is over after Omicron. And I don't think there's any evidence of that. We've been seeing about one variant every 5 months for the last 2 years, and I don't see why that's going to change going forward. And the other thing that, you know, there's two what I consider fictions out there right now. The first is that this is over after Omicron, that Omicron basically is now, quote, a mild, unquote, infection. And I put that in quotes because almost 600 people have been hospitalized here since New Year's, and over 150 people have died since New Year's. That's not what I call a mild infection. That's a severe infection. It's just less severe than Delta was. So we are not out of the woods yet on that. And when Omicron is over, there is no guarantee that the next variant is going to be similar to Omicron. Omicron was actually a bit of a quantum leap, if you will, over the previous variants. And it made a big jump because of its immune escape capabilities, but there's nothing that says the next variant will be a descendant of Omicron. It may actually end up being a descendant of Delta or some other variant that we haven't even seen before. And I don't know how many times I've heard even the best scientists say that, yeah, we don't think it can get any worse. We don't think it can become more infectious. I've heard that at least a couple of times. I heard it before Delta. There was a paper that actually came out which claimed that, oh, there's very little chance it's going to get more contagious than it is now. Then Delta, of course, blew that paper out of the water. And then after Delta, everybody said, oh, I don't think it can get much worse than this. Well, we've seen what Omicron did. It put Delta to shame. You know, we peaked at Delta at about 900. We peaked with Omicron at almost 5,000. So, you know, huge differences there. And anybody who claims that they can predict the future of this pandemic is selling you a bill of goods and don't buy. It's not worth the money it's printed on. So I think, you know, I worry about the future, especially if we all let our guard down, especially if our leaders let their guard down and don't have masks readily available, have tests available, basically have the tools necessary for people to go back and protect themselves if we do see another surge. And I think, you know, the concern I have is a lot of people are like, oh, we're over COVID, we're done with it, the vaccines are keeping us out. Well, you know, our vaccines have done a good job. They've certainly, in those who are vaccinated, they've radically reduced the deaths and illness, but there are still breakthrough infections. There are still people who die with breakthrough infections. And so we still have to be very, very concerned here. But I worry that, you know, we're going to go into a period after Omicron where people are just going to let their guard down completely. And then when the next one comes along, we're going to miss it. And we're going to end up in the same situation we've been in before. I mean, how many times have we repeated? We say it's over, and then we get hit again. We say it's over, then we get hit again. Unless we anticipate the possibility that we may get hit again and prepare for that, we're not going to be ready when the next one comes. And that's what I really
worry. We are preparing as if this is the end. That's what scares me, Doc. When I say we, I'm talking about our government policymakers and our government leaders. As I see it, anyway, we are preparing as if this was the end of COVID, and that in March we're gonna end safe travels. We're gonna end the mask mandates, and I heard that this morning, and that's simply not true. I just had a message from a good friend of mine less than an hour ago. He's a breakthrough case. He's boosted, but he started getting symptoms. Took a home test, positive. And he had a question regarding isolation times and when can he go back to work and so forth. My point is this: that case will not be counted in the county's numbers.
Okay.
A week ago, same scenario. The whole family tested positive. 5 in the household all tested positive. I think 3 of them was actually symptomatic, and there was absolutely no follow up from the Department of Health when they called the Department of Health and said, do we need to do anything? You need to report this or record this? No, just they gave them the isolation guidelines, but that was it. I don't know how many of those cases are out there, but the question I have, Doc, is the positivity rate. Right? They kind of kept it secret for a little while. Now they're starting to produce it. How are they getting the positivity rates? This would just be the cases that are the testing that is being done at a DOH or county facility, right?
Well, I mean, it's basically what gets into the reporting system. So it's not just DOH and county facilities. It also includes the hospitals, doctors' offices, et cetera, that are reporting. But again, it's only those that are reporting. And I don't fully understand why the system got so overwhelmed, because it should just be a matter of adding up a bunch of numbers. But I think part of it is they try to deduplicate the data, which is they try to remove people who tested twice so that they only count as one infection. And so I think that, that's where they got bogged down. Now, I would have thought that, some of that was automated, and I believe that much of it is, but I'm told they have slow computer systems. But again, DOH is the one that you should probably ask that question of. Now, I believe what they're doing is they're not taking the time necessarily to deduplicate and putting out these short-term positivity rates just to get something out there fairly quickly. So they're just taking the number of positives over the total number of tests that were done during that period without removing those that may be duplicates, which is probably a small fraction. So it's probably not a bad estimate at this point. But, I mean, it does point out the need for us to set up an actual surveillance system. The UK has this incredible system that the Office of National Statistics runs that, in fact, does cross-sectional surveys in the population. So they can actually tell you on, I think it's a weekly basis, pretty much what fraction of the population is actually infected with COVID at that point in time. And they test something like 150,000 people every month or so. So it's a fairly large sample, and they get good numbers. So they can actually tell you. And even though, yes, they had problems with their case reporting system just because it got overloaded, because, they were going completely crazy, even worse than us in the early stages of Omicron. So they absolutely overwhelmed their testing capacity. They already made widespread use of home tests because the government would actually distribute them to people for free. You could just call up the government office and basically they'd send you 7 test kits, 7 strips pretty much, that you could then use basically to do a week of test on yourself if necessary. So, they didn't capture all the cases, absolutely. But at the same time, they had this cross-sectional surveillance system that, in fact, did collect the data. And so they do know what exactly the trend looked like. And in fact, they can even do analyses now where they're showing you that, well, actually, the case trend is dropping a little faster than what the actual population trend is. And that's probably related to what you just talked about, the fact that a lot of people who are testing positive now on home test are not getting into the system at all. And so it's interesting because actually in the ONS survey, which is a cross-sectional survey, so it's actually looking at the population as a whole, the numbers are actually starting to go up a little bit now, whereas the case numbers are still going down. So, having that type of actual surveillance would be incredibly valuable here. We do have flu and influenza surveillance, but that's relatively small samples. It's nothing big enough to really capture the trends of what's going on in the population here in terms of something like COVID. And CDC in the United States has done an absolutely terrible job on data. We have no national data system. We rely on departments of health that have data systems of varying quality and varying information. We know, for example, the difficulties we have here in getting information about cases in terms of who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. DOH does not routinely have that as part of their data system at this point. And, those are real challenges and real issues, I think, going forward as we try to deal with this. Because one of the things we're going to have to be monitoring as we move forward is what is the immune status of our population. Okay, we know now at this point that vaccines wane over time. Okay, and they wane at different rates depending on what variant we're talking about. So if you're talking about a variant like Delta, you probably still have about 75, 80% protection against infection from your double vaccination against Delta. But against Omicron, if you're 6 months out, you basically have probably 20 or 30% protection, if even that. Okay, so this waning is really important. And that means we need to be able, from our vaccine system, to get a good idea of exactly where people are in terms of that time from vaccination so we can assess what's the overall immune status of our population. Because the thing that is determining how Omicron is playing out in different countries and in different areas of countries is what the immune status of the population is. It's not just the vaccination rate. It's the time from vaccination as a distribution involved with whether or not people have been boosted. So in the UK, for example, one reason they brought deaths down substantially is they boosted everybody in December. Boris Johnson, in probably the first positive move he made on COVID in his entire career, basically decided that he would get everybody boosted by January 1st. And they did that in the UK. Everybody who was eligible got boosted basically before January 1st, or like 80, 90% of them. So they did a remarkable job. We've done a terrible job in the United States. I think nationwide we're less than 40% boosted. Here, I think about 56% of the eligible are boosted, according to the figures at this point, which is not too bad. But as a nation, we've done terrible. We have actually the slowest booster rate of any of the really developed countries. And we're also at the bottom of the curve in terms of vaccinations nationally. We're doing okay in Hawaii, but nationally we're like 65% vaccinated, whereas most other countries are at 75, 80, even above 80% now. So we've done a terrible job in that regard as well. And I think it's basically our dysfunctional political system that I think is really driving this at this point, because it's interfered with our ability to do public health rather than helping us to do public health.
Doc, let me ask you, it seems quite obvious at this point that I guess a great number of the people of Hawaii, I mean, we have very strong holdouts with the people that come on that still feel that we're in dangerous times, but it seems like a great number of those either have, would you say they have been conditioned to think that they have nothing to worry about? Because everything seems very, very haphazard at this point. And, it's almost as if no matter how many type of shows like this try to bring on positive spin, it's just the people just not following it. They feel that, nah, they think they got this. Like,
Well, I think I think there's a couple things behind that, Charlie.
Yeah.
First is they are being told by the media and by their politicians that Omicron is the end of this thing, that Omicron is the ultimate evolution of COVID to basically your common cold, and that you really don't have a whole lot to worry about at this point. They're getting that day in, day out from the media. And it's strange because it's totally discordant with the fact that over 3,000 people died in the United States yesterday and have for the last 4 or 5 days. Okay, so we are dealing with over 3,000, basically a 9/11 worth of deaths literally every day from COVID right now. And this is what we're calling mild. So, the media message and the politicians' message, I think, is totally out of whack with what is actually happening in the community. People are tired, okay? And I don't blame them. We've been through this 2 or 3 times where they have been told it's the end, and then somebody pulls the rug out from under them. And I have said from day one with this, be straight with the people, be honest with them, warn them that there may be another one coming, and stop feeding them the happy juice. The happy juice is not conducive to good public health practice. Telling the truth and giving people reality is what produces good public health practice. I think we're in a situation now where for many of the people, at least with the current variants, for many of the people who are boosted, and especially those who are younger, for them, the risk is probably similar to the risk associated with flu. Okay. But while the risk to the individual is that, the fact is this spreads much faster than flu spreads. As we've seen with Omicron, this thing spreads incredibly fast, which means even though the overall fatality may be lower for those people, when you multiply it by 5 or 6 times as many infections as the flu ever produces, you're going to end up with more deaths anyway. And people aren't factoring that into things. They're also not factoring in that we may have another variant coming. We don't know what it is right now. It's not BA2. I'll talk about that in a second. But there is a chance, and in fact, I'd say a probability, fairly high probability, that we will see some additional variants coming down the pike. We still have 40% of the world that's completely unvaccinated at this point. A lot of that is in Africa, where we also have a large number of immunocompromised people with HIV. Most people in Africa with HIV are on treatment now, but not all. And immunocompromise basically allows the virus, COVID, basically to stay within the body for a longer period of time, which gives it more time to evolve. Okay, so we're increasing the probability of variants by not vaccinating people in Africa. So in fact, we've kind of cut our own throats by failing to help the world to get vaccinated. Okay? And as a consequence, we are allowing the virus an incredible pool of people in which to evolve itself to new forms that can even eventually work around our vaccines, as we have seen with Omicron. I'm just saying it's luck of the draw that Omicron basically ended up being less less severe in terms of its overall impacts. It is less severe than Delta was, for example, and especially less severe if those in people who are vaccinated. So I think that, the problem is that was a luck of the draw. In fact, I actually saw a nice article, I think it was on NPR, on the NPR website yesterday. And they were talking about, people need to realize it's a 50-50 shot as to whether the next variant is more severe or less severe. And we really do not have any way of predicting which way that's going to go. We also don't know, most likely it will be more transmissible just because it ends up probably having to be more transmissible to eventually force out the other ones. Although, again, that can get complicated because that can depend on the immune status. So Omicron has an advantage due to immune breakthroughs. But once it's broken through and infected those people, they will probably have a good bit of protection against future Omicron infections. And that may give another one, like Delta, the opportunity to come back in. Okay, so we can't rule out that even the existing variants might not make a resurgence later in the year once the Omicron wave has totally passed and our immunity starts to wane across the board if people have not been, keeping up on their vaccines and not taking precautions to keep this from spreading. So I think that, the way it's going to go, nobody can predict at this point. And I think that's the real challenge.
Well, thank
You
you.
want to expand a little bit about what you talked about, the immunity status of the population, because you touched on this earlier. every morning on the news we hear 75% vaccinated. A lot of those people that were vaccinated, they're way beyond, and they haven't gotten boosted. And some of them that even had gotten boosted, the time is ticking, right? So there's a period of time that we don't know for each person that got vaccinated. So while the number of vaccinated may be 75%, and a percentage of that may have been boosted, but we don't know when. The actual vaccination, or I shouldn't say, protected number is much less. There's that number is much smaller. I don't know. I mean, they estimate about 30% of the people are boosted, 35%. But there's a lot of those people, a lot of the people that had the second shot more than 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago, those people are vulnerable. Their protection, with Omicron could be down 20%, could be down to 20%. So knowing all of that, I don't know, you've been studying this for years now. Is there a way to kind of estimate what the actual case count really is based on the positivity rate, and knowing that our vaccinated rate is much less? We've heard some doctors say it could be 4 or 5. I've heard some experts say it could be 8 times as many as being reported. Do you have any idea what that might be?
I mean, as a rule of thumb, I tend to use 4, which seems to be a number that later in the epidemic seemed to be holding up fairly well. When you actually, the CDC, for example, has done some work in which they compare cross-sectional studies at blood banks with the number of cases reported. And for most places, that is typically finding about 4 times as many actual infections as there were cases reported. But it varies from place to place, and it was higher earlier in the epidemic. Now, with Omicron, we don't have any real data on that recently, so I can't exactly say what it might be with Omicron. Maybe higher with Omicron wouldn't surprise me, because of the fact that home tests basically aren't captured in the system, and that just Omicron spread so quickly, and also that there may be a lot of asymptomatic infections in the community with Omicron. Because so many people are vaccinated, many of them may in fact have a comparatively mild or completely asymptomatic infection, which means they don't, show any symptoms whatsoever. But one thing we do know from studies of both Omicron and Delta before that and Alpha before that is that asymptomatic people can transmit just as readily as symptomatic people. There's not a whole lot of difference in the viral load between symptomatics and asymptomatics. So if we do have asymptomatic people in the community, they could be transmitting for sure. So, I can't give you an accurate number on that. Nobody can. And that would be why, that's one of the reasons I say we need to set up a decent surveillance system that actually does cross-sectional samples within the population to give us an idea of how this is changing over time. Because we really do need to know kind of cross-sectionally what's going on within the community in terms of this, so that we can track what's happening, also so we can catch the next one as it comes in. Right? Because one of the things I worry about is, as we move past Omicron, our politicians basically don't want to invest any political capital in COVID anymore. They're post-COVID themselves already. As you can tell, anytime you listen to any of them basically talking in public, they're all talking about, we're over the COVID era. Basically, we're moving into, happy times where everything can go back to the way it was in 2019. I don't believe that for a second. This is going to be a respiratory pathogen that's going to continue to circulate in our community. We need to keep monitoring and tracking it so we can keep people informed of what's going on. We need to catch new surges before they become huge. And that means using a lot more than just hospitalization data. Hospitalization data is too late. If you're relying on hospitalization data, you missed the surge 3 weeks ago, buddy. You completely missed it. And that's when people should have stopped taking precautions. And that's why actually the system that they are trying to set up now for wastewater surveillance is really critical, because that will actually pick up the early introduction of COVID into the community and will pick up the surges early. For example, in Boston, it was very good at picking up the Omicron surge even before they started to see the caseloads going up. So wastewater surveillance needs to be one part of the system. Cross-sectional surveillance in the hospitals, probably. not only of people who come in with respiratory symptoms, but also of a sample of people who are coming in for other reasons that are showing no symptoms of COVID. We need to take a cross section of those people, and that then gives us an estimate of what the prevalence is going to look like in the population as a whole, so that we can kind of track over time, how is this prevalence evolving? Now, we don't have the resources here to do what they did in the UK, of following or testing 150,000 people a month, basically, to do this. But we could do a sample that was appropriate to our population size and get a pretty good idea of what's going on there. And I think, that needs to be part of our surveillance going forward. And what I worry about is, honest truth, if you look at all the CARES money and all of the resources that came in, it was kind of telling. We had an article published in the paper about 3 weeks ago now, I think, where they talked about who received different types of money here in Hawaii. And basically, virtually none of that money went into public health. I think it was something like 10 million went to public health. Most of it went to businesses or individuals, the unemployment benefits that were paid, the expanded benefits. It went to restaurants, basically to help keep the restaurant staff employed and keep the restaurants open. It went to hospitals. Hospitals received a substantial chunk, basically to help cover the cost, for example, of the traveling nurses and doctors who came in to help us out during our surges. But I think only about 10 million or something went to public health. It was a drop in the bucket that went to public health. So we actually haven't spent the money we need to strengthen our surveillance system, to strengthen our public health department, to make it more ready to deal with what we're seeing coming forward. And we're seeing the limitations of that now in all the data problems that we've had over the last 3 to 4 months. These are not new problems. We've seen them since the Delta surge. We had it during the Delta surge. We had days where we had major dropouts and cases weren't reported, or cases got delayed multiple days. So, this has been an ongoing problem for some time, and we really need to strengthen our Department of Health very substantially. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of resources being put into that. Now, the good thing is the governor did propose in State of the State, basically, to increase the training for doctors and nurses so we can try to build up our staff of doctors and nurses in the islands, which I think is very necessary. We have a healthcare system that is really kind of on the fine, hairy edge right now, as we've seen by the fact that we've been driven right to the edge twice in the last year. Okay, where we literally had to bring in 600, 700 people from the mainland basically to help us get over it. That tells us we don't have enough doctors and nurses here in the islands to handle emergency needs. And, and heaven help us if we end up with a COVID surge at the same time as we get hit by a hurricane or something. We've been lucky in that, except unfortunately for you folks on Kauai, most of the islands have actually dodged a lot of the damage from hurricanes. We've been very, very fortunate. And growing up in Florida, I know the damage that hurricanes can really do. But, in the islands, it's really Kauai and the Big Island that's taken the brunt, and Oahu's pretty much been spared, except for parts of Waianae. But if we get hit with a direct hit on Honolulu, for example, and a lot of people get injured, a lot of people need hospitalization care and so on, we may have real problems there, especially if it's coupled with power outages and everything else, as we have seen in the past from hurricanes here, where we lost power for 2 or 3 days. So, there are a whole lot of issues that we've got to deal with going forward, and having a shortage of doctors and nurses is something that does need to be rectified. So I think there's a whole lot we've got to do to prepare for whatever's to come. And I'm not just talking about COVID. I'm talking about emergencies. I'm talking about the next nasty flu. There's absolutely nothing that doesn't mean we couldn't get hit with another H1N1 like the 1918 flu that could do a lot of damage and could have an extremely high mortality rate. So, COVID's not the only kid on the block when it comes to respiratory pathogens. There's a whole bunch of them out there. So, we've got to strengthen our system and have the capacity to deal with this going forward. And that's something we haven't done very effectively here in the islands at all. In fact, it shocks me that we haven't staffed up more through the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic, that we haven't strengthened our Department of Health any more than we have. I think the latest request was only like 20 additional staff or something at DOH. I mean, it's a very meager request for a department that is badly understaffed in terms of everything it has to do. So I think, we've got a whole lot of work to do to get ready for a future in which there may be COVID, there may be another respiratory pathogen, there may be a natural emergency, such as a major hurricane, and we're just not ready for those things.
Yeah, it comes down to political will. As far as, let's just say, surveillance testing, right? Um, we may not have the capacity right now simply because they have not made it a priority. But as you mentioned with the funding, the governor proposed $1 billion to go into a rainy day fund, and he says, "Wow, we thought we were going to be in the hole." Well, you got to understand, a lot of those monies that we got from the federal government were used to pay for services that would have normally been paid out of the state budget. So that freed up state money so they could have this surplus, so which now he wants to put in a rainy day fund. But it really is just a matter of the priority, right? If we wanted to get an accurate snapshot of the COVID spread in this state, yeah, you would do surveillance testing. You cannot tell me that the state couldn't make that happen. They could, they choose not to. Doc, before we go on, I want to get this question from George because he said earlier you mentioned the next variant is a 50-50 chance crapshoot. Was that illustrative or was I'm assuming that was just basically a figure of speech. We
It's
don't know
basically
because,
it's basically saying we don't know.
yeah, and we have
Okay,
no
let me
control.
look at what happened. Okay, Wuhan variant. Wuhan variant is actually pretty damn close to where Omicron is in terms of severity. Okay, the original COVID is maybe 20% less hospitalizations than you would see with Omicron at this point if people weren't vaccinated. Okay, it's a little more complicated now because vaccination's in the game. D614, which was the second variant that took over the world, basically was about the same level of severity as the Wuhan. Okay, it didn't mutate too much, and that's because most of its mutations were really related to making it more transmissible. Alpha, which came along next, had a higher hospitalization rate than the previous variants. Delta had a higher hospitalization rate, so more severe than Alpha was. And then Omicron came along and was less severe than Delta, less severe than Alpha, but about just slightly below the level of the original Wuhan strain. Okay, so like I say, it's a crapshoot. We don't know which way it's going to go. It depends on where the evolution in the genome happens. And the thing you got to remember about Omicron was a massive shift in terms of its genome. Basically, there were over 50 base pair changes in Omicron, which is much higher than what we saw in the previous variants. Some of the variants are as low as 2 or 3. The D614 variants only had maybe 8 to 10 sort of changes in their genome. The Delta, I think, had about closer to 20. But then Omicron was almost 50. So, there's a lot of fluctuation in that, and it depends on what's going on. What actually made Omicron less severe was the fact that it lost some of its ability to infect the ACE2 receptor, and it shifted over to a different approach, basically for infecting cells, of kind of merging itself into the cells. And that means it actually became much more effective at infecting the upper airways than infecting the lungs themselves. And that's what produced the less severe manifestations that we see with Omicron. But it's important to remember, if you're not vaccinated, your risk is still comparable to the original variants of COVID. So when I say, it could go either way, I mean exactly that. We do not know which way the next variant will go in terms of its severity. And you hear a lot of people in the press who don't know what they're talking about, who basically tell you that viruses always evolve toward more benign forms, that they always move toward coexisting with their host. Okay, that is only true if the transmission is associated with the severity. Okay, so Ebola, for example, doesn't spread very far because it kills so many hosts so quickly that it can't spread. So its severity basically affects its transmissibility. With COVID, most of the transmission has been done long before you kill the host. The thing that we had the hardest time getting our our heads around in the early stages of this epidemic was this is a virus that actually starts infecting people before you even develop symptoms. Okay. That was something it took them almost 3 months to figure out in the early days of this epidemic before they finally admitted, yes, people are getting infected while the host or the index case was asymptomatic. And in fact, we know now that almost 60% of infections occur from asymptomatic people. Okay, either before they develop symptoms or those who go through the entire infection period without ever developing symptoms. And that means that if it kills off the host 2 weeks out, well, it doesn't really matter because it's already basically transmitted itself as much as it's going to. Okay, so the transmission and the killing of the host are really decoupled with COVID, because all the infections occur long before the host is going to die. Look at when the deaths occur with COVID. They occur typically 4, 5, 6 weeks out. You are probably already largely not infectious at that point in time, but you're in the hospital and you're basically on your way to dying. Okay, so by decoupling those two, that means that the fact that it increases its transmissibility says nothing about what it's going to do in terms of its severity. And it just depends on the luck of the draw in terms of where the mutations occur and basically how they change its ability to interact with our tissues. And so that's why I say nobody can predict what the severity of the next variant of COVID is going to be. We just don't know at this point. And I'm not going to say 50-50, 50-50. It's when I say 50-50, I just mean it's literally a crapshoot.
Yeah.
We have no idea. And anybody who tells you that they can predict that, like I say, is selling you a bill of goods.
There's a couple more things I want to cover before we end, man. 1 hour just doesn't seem long enough. But you made it very clear on Spotlight that mild is not the same as less severe. I think our leaders get that mixed up because they keep talking about this being a mild disease. But you explained it a lot better on Spotlight. But basically said it's less severe, but it's not a mild disease. And I think you explained the reasons earlier. But if you want to touch on that a little bit, just there is a difference between being mild and less severe.
There is. And I think, part of the difficulty is people are. The challenge actually with understanding this is that it is very much tied in with vaccinations. Okay? The vaccinations, even with Omicron, while Omicron basically breaks through our protections in terms of infection, of getting infected in the first place, the vaccines maintain their effectiveness against severe illness. Okay, so I think that that's something that's difficult for people to separate. Okay, so but it is the fact that because so much of our population is vaccinated, they are largely protected against the more severe forms of illness. But that's not true for everybody. Okay, for those who are older, those who have co-conditions, whether that condition is obesity, diabetes, coronary conditions. I mean, there are a whole host of other things that basically increase your risk of severe COVID. For some of those people who get breakthrough infections, they will be hospitalized and some of them will die of that. Okay? That's not what I call a mild infection. And so it's difficult for people to separate out the effects of the vaccines from the effects of the virus itself. But the virus itself, if we had an unvaccinated population, a totally unvaccinated population, would be very similar to the original strain of COVID in terms of what it caused in hospitalizations and deaths, which is we'd see a lot. But we are, to a great extent, protected now because we do have about 75% of our population vaccinated and about 50% of those eligible boosted. Okay, so that's protected us to some extent. But with that said, like I say, we've had 600 people hospitalized since New Year's, and we've lost 150 people in that same time frame. Under no circumstances would I consider that to be a mild infection. that's definitely a serious illness that we need to be concerned about. And I think that, this constant harping on mild that we're getting in the media from the politicians, I think is vastly underestimating what the potential of this is. And we have to remember, your protection is going to be waning the further you are away from that second or third shot. And there actually is a CDC study that just came out today that is seeing waning in protection against hospitalization after 3 to 4 months, even with the booster. Okay, that study was literally published in MMWR this morning. I downloaded it this morning. So as time goes on, our ability to both fight off the infection and also the risk of more serious illness will increase unless we continue to boost or we continue to basically find ways to deal with this. Now, part of that we can deal with by having the treatments available. Okay, but the treatments are contingent upon keeping our testing in place. And this is what I worry about. Okay, the treatments, Paxlovid is 90% effective at basically saving people, preventing hospitalization. It's amazing. Okay, it's virtually a miracle drug. But we're not going to have decent supplies of that until May or June. We've got a dribble of supplies in the islands right now. So to have a decent supply of that, we're still talking probably May or June. So that's further off. But if we're going to use that treatment, it has to be used within the first 5 days, which means we have to have the testing. But are we really going to be maintaining our testing capacity once everybody's been told it's over and that, oh, you don't have to worry about COVID anymore? People won't even think about going for a COVID test anymore. And yet their protection against severe illness will be waning over time. And so I think that, it's going to be a real issue moving forward. It's maintaining that appropriate balance within the community of how much should I worry about COVID as opposed to how much do I just want it to be gone. And it's really ultimately the virus that's going to determine that. But if we had a better idea of what the immune status in our population was through cross-sectional testing, for example, and they actually do that in the UK. One of the subsets of the ONS survey that they do is they actually look at people's antibody levels. Okay, so they actually have some idea of what the level of resistance to infection in the community is. And that's something that, it can actually be done with a handful of rapid tests. There's a method that Michael Mina developed about a year and a half ago, basically for using rapid tests to try to look at what the epidemic dynamics is looking like that could be used to get some sense of that. But we really need to be monitoring that so that we're ready. If a new variant comes in and we know that our immune status is very low, then we have to be able to get people boosted very, very quickly. Otherwise, we may end up seeing a lot more hospitalization and death. So, we've got to have a system in place. We've got to stop this haphazard, totally reactive, well, I'm not going to worry about it until it hits sort of planning. That's not planning. And, as many people have said in the past, hope is not a strategy. We actually need a strategic plan and a system in place basically for maintaining our testing, maintaining our ability to get masks out to the community immediately, to basically have access to treatment immediately after testing, not delayed, because delay is a bad thing with these drugs. Delay basically allows the virus to proceed far enough that the drugs no longer work. Okay? All of that's got to be in place as we move into the post-Omicron era so that we're ready when the next variant does come. And I, for one, do not believe there will not be another variant after Omicron. I believe there will be, because there's just too big a breeding ground out there for variants right now to stop the evolution of this virus.
I think you and many other doctors feel the same way as far as the next variant. and again, we have always been a reactive state, rather than focus on being proactive. And that's a scary part, because they're not ready for the next one. They're not ready for the next one. Charlie, did you have something?
Yeah, I think, and it touches along the lines with a good doctor here has said, that many individuals out there, because they haven't gotten bitten by this virus, are kind of rolling the dice and said, hasn't happened to me, so it probably won't until such time they get it, and then they realize, oh boy, I'm in trouble. It's like those. You remember when we first got into the police department, we would always say there are those that would actually through the academy to become police officers, and then there are those that like to read murder mystery novels. You know, they're better than actually doing it, and that's far from the truth. And I think right now we do have a great number in our population because they haven't been tagged by this virus that they're rolling the dice and just they're lucky so far, but luck will run out. I'm not saying definitely, but for someone, I mean, I kind of was on that edge before I had my heart attack. I said, man, I'm
Mm.
perfectly fine. Don't worry, don't worry. And next thing you know, boom, I got it, and two other fellow officers with me got it, and but unfortunately, they both expired while on the job. So it becomes. I think the message tonight is very clear, and that is, don't wait until you think you can beat this thing. If you go into a preventative mode, why not go into it? I mean, that's the same reason why Honolulu tall high rises have to go into the preventive mode of putting water sprinklers. They won't wait until you get another big, Marco Polo incident and just lose lives there. It can't be anymore.
No, I think what you're saying is important. I think the fact that we still have a number of vaccine holdouts.
Mhm.
35% in the United States as a whole is a real worry, because those people are vulnerable to severe illness even with Omicron. And that is the reason why we are seeing over 3,000 Americans dying every day right now. We had 120,000 in the hospital a couple of days ago. I think it's down below 100,000 today because it's finally declining. But, that was a very serious illness. And 90% of that was preventable if those people had gotten vaccines. And that's the real sad part here. But because our political system got involved in this and vaccines were turned into a political football, just as masks were, the exact same thing happened with masking. Trump and his cronies basically, and his Republican cronies, turned masking into a political statement rather than a public health measure. And so that politicization of both masking and vaccines took our two most effective tools off the table for 35% of our population. And that's the problem. And that's why the US is doing worse in terms of death than virtually any other country. We have one of the highest death rates in the world with COVID. And it's because, well, two things. I mean, one, yeah, we've got a lot more comorbidities and so on in our population, one of the world's highest rates of obesity, for example. And we've got just a lot of people who just don't take the vaccine, just ignore public health measures entirely and don't mask either. And that's the reason, we are seeing this terrible situation in the United States compared to what most other countries are. And it's sad because had we had proper public health messaging, I think from the start of this epidemic, we could have avoided that. And I think another problem with the bad public health messaging from day one of this, and I'm not putting it on just Trump's feet. I mean, CDC screwed up right from day one with this pandemic. WHO screwed up in the early days, refusing to admit airborne transmission and fighting against masks as well in the earliest days. The only ones who got this straight right from the start were the Asians. Asian countries like Taiwan had it straight from day one. And if you actually look at Asia, outside of India, you basically get the lowest death rates in the world because Asia has taken it seriously from day one because they had previous experience with SARS and MERS, and they knew that you take respiratory pathogens seriously. So Taiwan was actually handing out masks the first week. You basically, with your Taiwan identity card, you could go pick up 5 masks at any drugstore. And they basically took their stockpile and distributed it to the people. And so they knew masking worked, and they knew it was important, and they knew it was effective. And we, on the other hand, were quibbling. CDC and WHO both telling us, oh, don't use the mask because we need to save them for the healthcare workers, blah, 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 rather than trying to to beef up the mask production capacity. So instead of using the National Defense Act basically to go and produce masks, we said, oh, don't use a mask. Masking really doesn't work anyway. And so we poisoned the well for masking, our most effective intervention, right from day one. Then we did the same thing with vaccines after they rolled out. We turned it into a political football. And on top of that, the other bad part of our public health messaging has always been, well, this surge is the last surge.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have we told the American people that? And every time it's been a lie. It's been a misinformed, poorly executed, and badly told lie. And now we're doing it again. We're doing it again. We're telling everybody after Omicron it's over, you can go back to the way things were in 2019. No, people. Look, my message to people right now is, look, do not expect the politicians to do it for you going forward. The politicians have decided that COVID is a political liability for them. So they are not going to deal with it if they can avoid it. I mean, our current one, Kai Kahele is actually one of the strongest in terms of saying he wants to do something about COVID. But, everybody else seems to have moved past it. We're already talking about rollback safe travels, do away with safer access to Oahu, blah, 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 blah. Everything is, we're all going back to normal, dropping all restrictions. Well, if the restrictions get dropped, folks, it's up to you. You have to take the steps necessary to protect yourselves. You have to keep your supply of masks handy. And if we start seeing COVID circulating in the community again, get those masks out and use them. Don't worry about looking strange because, you're the only guy in the room wearing a mask. Especially if you've got comorbidities or something, that mask will keep you alive. Keep your vaccines up to date according to whatever the current guidance is, and hope that we keep our guidance up to date as well. I think people will have to take this on because our politicians are not really going to lead on it moving forward, I don't believe. And, I hate to say that, but I think it's the simple reality. Even Biden himself in July basically was, we're past COVID, it's over. And yet all of us saw Delta coming on the horizon except CDC. They somehow missed that one. But any of us who were actually watching what happened in Singapore, what happened in the UK, what happened in Israel, we knew Delta was coming. We were ready. We were prepared for it. And we knew that CDC made a mistake when they told people they could get rid of their mask if they got vaccinated. But, so it's going to be up to you to protect yourselves. And my hope would be maybe if we can't get the politicians to do the necessary in terms of restrictions when we need them or, putting safer things into place, safer practices into place, then maybe at least they can build up their mask supplies, build up the testing supplies, build up the treatment supplies so that we actually have them when we need them. So that we're not discovering we're in the middle of a surge and, we've only got 50 doses of Paxlovid in the islands. So we're not even close to ready to begin to deal with this. Let's at least have them do that part of their job in terms of keeping the supplies that are necessary for people to protect themselves. And I think, that, so it really is going to come down much more on us, I think, to take responsibility for protecting ourselves moving forward. And for everybody, that calculus may be slightly different. And my hope is, that we can get some better public health guidance out there to at least tell people what the realities are and then let them make their choices. And if they choose wrong, some of them will end up in the hospital, some of them will die. But, there comes a point where we can no longer force it on them, especially when we're getting the kind of pushback we're getting right now. So it is really going to come down to people taking responsibility for protecting themselves and their families and pushing the politicians as much as you can. But again, I think, politically they've kind of moved post-COVID. And I don't see them coming back in the near future. They may get pulled back reactively when they have no choice. If another variant hits in June or July, they won't have a choice. They'll get pulled back into it. But they're going to be trying to act like it's not there anymore, I think, going forward. So it's going to be up to us. It's our responsibility, basically, to deal with this. Nothing new.
I think they've been in post-COVID mode for quite a while. My concern, a couple of concerns, and we'll wrap it up, is as far as the treatments that we get from the mainland, right, from the feds. we have kind of reduced our testing capacities on all the islands. A lot of people are using home tests now. When these treatments get sent out, they're going to be sent out to areas that need them, which means areas that have high cases and high instances of the disease. And if we continue to play with this system, so we get low numbers, so we can encourage, as the politicians, right? They're accepting these low case counts, even though the positivity rates are a little higher. We're not going to get an ample supply of treatments. We're just not going to get them. And we talked about Vegas. I mean, about the Super Bowl. We got the Super Bowl. We got a lot of our people going to Vegas this weekend. I know a ton of them are there to watch the Super Bowl in Vegas, and they're all going to be coming back home. Vegas is lifting their mask mandates, so there'll be no mask mandates in Vegas. And this will be my last question for you, Doc, because I believe that if we had implemented the testing of everyone, not just the non-vaccinated, but on everybody coming in pre-Delta, that we would have saved a lot of lives, that we would have kept a lot of the virus out if we had tested them, within 24 hours of departure. If you had a say right now, because again, there's talk about lifting safe travels in March. I mean, completely removing safe travels. It would be free travel. If you had any say, if you were the decision maker that had to make a decision right now, what would you do as it relates to the travel?
I think, fundamentally, yes, most of the transmission right now is local. That's absolutely true. But again, the introduction of these variants basically does come through travel. And I mean, if I had my druthers, given that we are an island location, that we have the ability actually to control our borders to an extent, gated by constitutional restrictions and legal restrictions within the United States. But we do have some control of that. I would prefer to keep testing in place before traveling, because I think it benefits not only in terms of protecting Hawaii against infection, it also reduces infection while people are traveling. Right? Because getting that test before traveling means a lot of the people who are infected aren't going to be traveling, which means they're not going to be in the airports, they're not going to be on the planes, they're basically going to not be transmitting. And so there's just a positive benefit there, in addition to the benefit to Hawaii and not having more infected people coming. With that said, I think, the thing I would rather see is actually kind of a booster requirement. Just because, again, I think public policy should be that we really encourage people to get boosted, because it's necessary at this point, especially with Omicron, basically to keep the risk down. And if another surge comes along, it will be necessary, I think, to protect people against what comes in the future. So if I were running safe travels right now, what I would be doing, rather than saying lift all restrictions, I'd be putting a testing requirement in before traveling, and I would basically have a boosting requirement. So travelers would be boosted and they would be tested before coming. And that, I think, would reduce the amount of exogenous introduction. It would also avoid ending up with tourists ending up in our hospitals, which is something I worry about given our limited hospital capacity. If we get a really nasty variant the next time, and we've got a lot of unvaccinated tourists coming into the islands, even if they're tested beforehand, they could get infected while here. And then that could end up being an issue. And given that 35% of the United States is still uninfected, and that's our major tourist market right now, since we still haven't really gotten the international travelers back, that's something I really worry about. So, I would keep those things in place in safe travels. And I would keep safer access, just because safer access, if we added a booster requirement, would encourage people to get boosted, which again is a positive thing, both in terms of transmission, but also in terms of reducing illness with a breakthrough infection. So, there are positives from a public policy perspective to both of those things.
Let me just write. I got to write something real quick before I forget.
With that said, let me throw out, since this is Super Bowl weekend and a lot of you are going to be going to Super Bowl. No, not going to happen.
Watch the comments. Watch the comments.
I'm not the type who would last in politics, believe me.
Okay, Super Bowl. What's your thought?
I'm not capable of mincing words that much, as you obviously know, listening to me. What's that? A Snickers bar?
Yeah, there you go.
I like
I was
this
going to
better.
say, with Super Bowl weekend coming up here, let me give people a little cautionary tale. I took today's active COVID caseload from the Department of Health website. I multiplied that by 4. What we talked about earlier, well, there's probably about 4 times as many infections out there as what we're picking up in the cases. I take active cases, multiply by 4. I've got roughly the number of people who are currently infected in Hawaii. Okay. If I now calculate, a little complicated, I'm not going to go through the math for you, but if I calculate a given number of people show up to a Super Bowl party, if I have X people, what's the chance that somebody in the room is infected? Okay, well, let me tell you what that calculation shows. If I have 15 people at my Super Bowl party, there's a 50% chance that somebody in that room is infected with Omicron. So think about that when you're getting together for your Super Bowl parties. And if you get up to 50 people, you're holding a big Super Bowl party, or you're going to a sports bar and taking your mask off and everything, then it's going to be 90% chance that somebody is infected in that room. Okay? So keep that in mind. We're not past this yet. We are still in the surge. We're just on the downswing of it. But there are still a lot of infected people in the community, and you should still be taking appropriate precautions, masking when you can, making sure your ventilation is good wherever you're holding your Super Bowl party, reducing the size of that party if you can, and keeping it down to just the people in your immediate circle who you interact with regularly. So, if you already pretty much know they're not infected, they probably would have transmitted it to you. And just take the precautions now. We are not past Omicron now. And remember, 600 hospitalized since January 1st, 150 dead. And that's with Omicron. So this isn't over yet. And I think it's really, really important that people keep that in mind as they go into their party mode this weekend. Sorry for being a downer again.
No, I mean that's just the truth. And for those on Kauai, 5 people died in this last week. 5.
Well, and Kauai actually has the highest positivity rate in the islands.
Yeah.
You're almost double the positivity rate on most other islands right now. So absolutely, it's an issue there.
Well,
So that
Doc,
calculation probably 10 people is enough to get you to 50% point on Kauai right now.
well, I'll be watching the Super Bowl with my wife, and at home, all alone. She's gonna make me one hell of a poo-poo spread, and I'm serious. It was always my brother and I would always go to Vegas on Super Bowl weekend and hit up one of the downtown parties at one of the downtown hotels. We haven't done that for years, and we miss it, but it's not worth the risk. I appreciate you saying how you said it because it makes so much sense. So thanks, Doc. Appreciate you. Any closing thoughts before we sign out of here?
Just again, I think, it's going to be up to all of us basically to take the precautions necessary. And, let's not rely on politicians who basically aren't going to deal with the issues. We see politicians who will deal with it, by all means, vote for them. Absolutely. I would strongly encourage that. But let's make sure that moving forward, we're proactive in dealing with COVID and get out of this reactive mode that has served us so poorly over the last 2 years. So that would be my final message.
Thank you. Ironically or interestingly, only one politician or one candidate has actually, only one has actually stood up and spoke out for the safety of the people of Hawaii, and that was Kai. That seriously, and that's the truth. Kai Kahele was the only one that has spoken up. So, I mean,
Well, and I would certainly recommend people listen to his Spotlight Hawaii earlier this week, because I think he dealt with a lot of the issues that are important to people in Hawaii.
yep, awesome, Charlie.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Brown. It's ironic in a sense that we're left in this position, and Dr. Brown hit the nail on the head when he said that this virus is in the community, it's saturated in the community, and it would be great if we can just let it die down. But because people have been cooped up for so long, they can't let it die down because one, they're going to gather. I mean, that's a natural thing. They're going to gather, and unbeknownst to them, they're going to spread this virus, and that's just the facts of life. So what's happening now is the way I look at it is as we try to let it die down. One thing Dr. Brown made very clear, and that is when we have more travelers coming in, it's sort of like adding more fuel to the fire to spark it back up again. Then we have to go through this whole process again. And then what happens is the patience runs out. So that's when all hell breaks loose. So I think my message for our family and friends that joined us tonight is just be responsible. I'm not going to tell you one way or the other what to do. You know what to do. Because I think as humans, a lot of people don't like to be told what to do. But it's sad when you get into a medical situation and you're being consulted by a surgeon or your doctor and you're lying there in the hospital. They're telling you what to do or you won't make it through this operation. And that's when everybody listen up. It's too bad we can't listen up right now because I think if we did, a lot of things would end much quicker and we can go back to life as we know it. But as long as we roll the dice and take the chance, it won't happen. So with that said, stay safe, everyone. Good to see all the family and friends. I'm so glad to be back. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Dr. Brown, and have a great and wonderful weekend, everybody. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Doc. You know, I always enjoy listening to Dr. Brown, whether it's here or in the news or on Spotlight or on some of the other programs that he's been on. Just, I mean, straight to the point, no fluff, no politics, just science, math, science and math does not have a political agenda, and I love that. So appreciate you taking the time, Doc. For our village, I think Doc said it all. Charlie just echoed that. I will do the same. Just take care of yourselves. We know at this moment, we know that our state is on a path to open up everything. They're targeting March. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll see the next variant for a month or two after that. So we just have to repeat the process. So let's be safe. Let's take care of our loved ones. Again, prayers for Trina tonight, guys, in the village. Let's go pray for Trina. For those of you that are been asking about my stepmom, she's at home, still on oxygen, cannot get her oxygen levels up to a point where she can actually take the oxygen off. So we continue to pray for her as well. There's so many people that have been devastated. We didn't even get a chance to talk about long haul. That's also a serious problem with COVID. As far as Super Bowl, guys, Rams 31, Bengals 24. Matt Stafford is going to get it. Joey Burrow is going to meet Aaron Donald and Von Miller. They're going to personally welcome him to the NFL. Rams 31.
Brother, you don't have COVID, right? Tell me you don't have COVID, right?
I don't have COVID,
Okay.
but Rams 31, Bengals 24. And you can take that to the bank.
You saying he's got brain fog, Charlie?
I went to the gas station to go pick up a drink today, my little energy drink, and the lady asked me, "Who's going to win the Super Bowl?" I said, "Rams." She says, "Get out!" Wow, go easy, call girl. So anyway, hey, Monday's Valentine's Day. I'll talk with Charlie. I'm not sure if we're gonna come on Monday night because I think you guys should spend time with your loved ones on Valentine's Day. But we'll chat and we'll talk about it. So if not on Monday, we'll see you guys on Wednesday night, guys. Love you guys. Take care. Doc, thanks again. We appreciate you more than you know. You guys all stay safe. God bless. We'll see you guys. Go